I've found is that there's two things that the typical advisor I speak to is first is like, you know, I don't have time to write a book. How can I do this? And so the short book formula addresses that head on. But then the second question that they always have is, okay, well, if I put in the time and the energy and effort into writing a book, then what, right? There's that fear that I'm going to do all this work, I'm going to put the book out there, and then crickets. And so people want more than just their mom to read the book. And so I've expanded a whole new section about 6 key strategies that I highly recommend advisors take or think about doing once they publish their book.
Welcome to the Active Advisor Podcast, brought to you by Harbor Capital. Join us as we learn from pros who have helped thousands of investors live better lives. I'm Brian Moore, and I'll be chatting with some of the brightest minds in the financial advisory business, bringing you insights on practice management and investment research that works for advisors and their clients.
Joining me today on this episode of the Active Advisor Podcast is Paul McManus. Paul is a best-selling author and a prominent figure in the financial services industry, specializing in helping advisors become best-selling authors themselves. Over the past 8 years, he has guided his clients in generating over $50 million in fees and commissions through innovative, authority-based marketing systems. Paul is the author of several influential books, including the Short Book Formula. He also has an exciting new release on the horizon titled From Author to Authority. Join us as we delve into Paul's insights on his authorship and marketing strategies that can transform your business. Welcome, Paul, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Brian. I'm glad to be here.
We're happy to have you on. So typically here on the Active Advisor, one of the first questions we like to ask each of our guests is, what is the first memory you have related to money or investing?
Perfect. And is it okay if I go way back to when I was about 5 or 7 years old?
Those are some of the best.
Yeah. So the first memory, I've always loved money. I think when I was about 7, I forget the exact age, but I was a fan of the TV show Dallas, with J.R. Ewing was the main character, and he was a Texas oil businessman, probably a billionaire at the time or whatever the number was. But for some reason, I was always very attracted to money. And that was probably an early influential TV program in my early days.
Excellent. Well, hopefully you've been managed to sidestep all the drama that JR had in his life. But he's seen a nasty downfall, if I remember there at the end.
Yeah. And the thing is, I have no connection to Texas. I have no connection to oil. But for some reason, that show appealed to my young 7-year-old mind.
There you go. There's nothing wrong with that. Thank you for sharing. Let's jump right in. Can you tell us more about what you're focused on today and what the catalyst was for your new book?
What I do is I help financial professionals, mostly financial advisors, but financial professionals more broadly, write, publish, and market a book so that they can grow their practice. And so everything that I do is geared around those things. I just released the latest edition of my book, The Short Book Formula. I have it here. I don't know if it'll show up on the screen or not, but it's a financial professional's guide to writing a book in 6 weeks to attract ideal clients. I first published this back at the end of 2022, and I just released the second edition of it about a few weeks ago. So I'm excited about the release. It's chock full of new insights that I've gained over the past couple of years. I've expanded it. I've gone a lot into talking about more marketing strategies, because what I've found is that there's two things that the typical advisor I speak to is first is like, I don't have time to write a book. How can I do this? And so the short book formula addresses that head on. But then the second question that they always have is, okay, well, if I put in the time and the energy and effort into writing a book, then what, right? There's that fear that I'm going to do all this work, I'm going to put the book out there, and then crickets. And so people want more than just their mom to read the book. And so I've expanded a whole new section about 6 key strategies that I highly recommend advisors take or think about doing once they publish their book.
Excellent. You've touched on this briefly, but I'm sure this has to be something you come across with each one of your clients. I heard you when you said it takes 6 weeks. My gut tells me this got to be longer than that, to take a lot of time to write a book. And time is a commodity, as we know, especially something advisors don't have. I'm curious to hear, in your opinion, what's the average commitment that you've obviously got a system and a process. What is the average commitment advisors have had to work with and, place with you in the past where, for you and your team add value and you come out with a really solid book offering?
The first thing is that we reframe what a book should be. A lot of people have this expectation that a book needs to be 50,000, 100,000 words, takes hours and hours to read. And that's just what I think is the common understanding of what a book is. And so what we've done and what I've done through my book, The Short Book Formula, is that I've reframed that into the ideal book that an advisor should be thinking about writing is between 12,000 to 25,000 words. But more specifically, what that translates into is a book that can be read cover to cover in 1 to 2 hours. Now, why is that important? So, various reasons, but simply being an author is nice, right? It's like, hey, I'm an author. Oh, congratulations, right? But for the book to actually do its job, in my mind, you actually want to not only get it in front of your ideal prospects, but you actually want to have them read it from cover to cover, consume the message, and not just put it on the bookshelf. And so, first and foremost, it's the reframing of what the final product should look like, which is 12,000 to 25,000 words. So that makes it more manageable, not just from the reading aspect, but from the actual writing process. The second thing is, and you're absolutely right, our typical client is a successful wealth manager, financial advisor, financial professional, and they're extraordinarily busy. I work with a range of people, and we'll get into some stories later on, but I know that your typical successful advisor is extraordinarily busy. And so then that becomes the next question, or the next concern, as you mentioned, is like, where will I find the time? And so through our process, our typical client is not a writer, right? So it's like, do I have to be a writer to be an author? And the answer, is no, you don't have to be a writer to be an author from our perspective. But what you do need to have is experience, ideas, a perspective, point of view. And that's where, through our process, the reason we say 6 weeks is that we guide them over 6 weeks through 6 1-hour Zoom sessions. And we essentially have our clients talk out their book. I mean, financial advisors are typically really good speakers, salespeople, et cetera. They have great stories, experience, et cetera. They know how to talk one-on-one. And so that's what we capture. We capture the magic through 6 1-hour Zoom sessions. And so, sometimes it can take longer in the sense that someone has to reschedule, things get busy. But if someone can commit to essentially 6 weeks and over that period of time about, everything that goes into preparing as well as after the sessions, what we tell people in over the course of 6 to 12 weeks, roughly, you're looking at about 15 to 25 hours total. And if you think about, that's like 2 hours on average a week. And if you think of the benefits of writing and publishing a book, which I hope we get into, it's a small amount of investment of time that's going to pay off big on the other side of it.
No, I think you brought up a great question. I think it definitely is an investment, not only on the advisor's time and assets, being time, which is one, and yours as well. There's definitely an art to storytelling, and you can probably articulate plenty of reasons why financial services professionals should write their own books.
Yeah. And I'd like to start with just really the big why of why should an advisor write a book. And so the central thesis that I have about the benefits of writing a book is that authorship accelerates the speed of trust. And I'll say that again. Authorship accelerates the speed of trust. And as an advisor, what's the real business that you're in? You're in the business of trust. A lot of these services, products, et cetera, are commodities. What differentiates you from the other person? Fundamentally, it's trust. And that is where a lot of that time, the reason people are so busy is that they're out there trying to earn trust. They're out there trying to present, they're out there networking, they're trying to build trust with people so that people will see them as their trusted advisor so that they can make the recommendations to help benefit their clients. And so the biggest constraint that advisors have is time, you're right, but it's also how do you fast track trust building? And so the central point that I'm making to my book, and what I believe strongly, is that authorship accelerates the speed of trust.
I actually want to backtrack on that for a second. I think one of the things that, there's studies out there that when potential clients go out and look for a new advisor, they're looking anywhere from 3 advisors. They definitely do, talk to friends, family, and then they hit online searching. And then they're out there, they're trying to figure out different ways to find out somebody who's validated. And definitely, to come back to your point, I think writing a book does help validate that advisor and kind of give them a leg up. So you've worked with the advisor, you've got the book written. How do you help them kind of get it published?
In terms of the publishing process, in our services, we help people go from, I like to say, blank sheet of paper to Amazon bestselling author. So we help guide them through all of those steps. So they don't need to have any expertise in writing. Again, going back to what we talked about earlier, all they need to do is have stories, experience, a point of view, and be willing to commit to about 15 to 25 hours working with us over the course of 6 to 12 weeks. And we can help them become an Amazon best-selling author. All of the things that go into a book, design, layout, copy editing, refinement, all of those things we cover for them. I will talk about one thing that we do, and I just alluded to it, was the Amazon best-selling author. And so becoming an author is great. I've heard some people say that it's the new business card. I would actually say it's actually the new college degree. And what do I mean by that is that probably 20 years ago or 40 years ago, having a college degree meant something, right? It's like, it wasn't typical. It was that, but now pretty much everyone has a college degree. It's the starting point for any profession. And so it doesn't really make you stand out. Whereas still, being an author does differentiate you from everybody else. And so I like to think of being an author as the new college degree in a very positive sense where it makes you stand out and people take notice of you. Now, when you add to that best-selling author, well, that's even better, right? Maybe that's like a master's degree. And so there's different lists out there. There's New York Times, there's Wall Street Journal, there's Amazon. I typically don't recommend people go after the New York Times. I mean, it's possible, but for the most part, to get on a list like that, you already have to be famous or you have to be willing to invest a tremendous amount of money to buy your way in. And so I typically don't recommend that course. But what I do recommend is shooting to become an Amazon bestselling author, which is, relatively speaking, much easier to accomplish. And at the end of the day, what you're able to say is, I'm a bestselling author, which is what you want to be able to communicate to the marketplace, to your clients, to your prospects, et cetera.
What is some of the best ways you've seen advisors use the book to help grow their business?
You had said it before, in that typically when someone's choosing a financial advisor, what are they doing? They're asking their friends, their families, they're going online. This is a very important decision. This is someone that ultimately they need to trust so that they take their advice and they follow through. And unfortunately, if you Google something, oftentimes an advisor, or if it's a nameless, faceless person, they don't really have a basis to judge. It's like, this person works there, this person works there. I really have no idea. Do they align with my values? I have no idea. So if you frame it that way, in the sense that you're not really competing against, say Dave Ramsey, Sue Orman, et cetera, when you write a book, that's the wrong frame. The correct frame is, for most people, most advisors, I'm competing against 3 or 4 other advisors. Now, do I want to be the person that they Google and nothing comes up, or just some boring generic website? Or do I want to be the advisor who they immediately see that I have a book, they take the time to read the book in advance of, say, meeting with me. They also put that book as a factor in comparing the different options. In my mind, and in my experience, that gives the advisor with a well-written book a very unfair advantage, because nobody likes to be sold to, but people do like to research and to buy and to be educated. And if you can give them that material that they need in the form of a short book, again, which can take them 1 to 2 hours to read, they'll get a sense of who you are, your values, why you do what you do, the people that you serve, how you help them, and it just creates a remarkably unfair advantage.
What are some of the other ways, kind of outside of that unfair advantage, that you've seen advisors leverage their book to open doors that you believe might not have been possible otherwise?
There's 2 other primary ways, there's a ton, but there's 2 others that come to mind right now. One is center of influence relationships. And so I work with a lot of advisors that believe in working with centers of influence, such as CPAs, to get referrals, which I think is a inherently smart strategy, especially when it comes into attracting those more affluent and ultra affluent clients, because the CPA has that relationship. And a lot of people, I think, have done this. And, if you ask your typical advisor about, how many referrals they get from a CPA, it's oftentimes not that great, right? There's an art and strategy into building those CPA relationships, but ultimately, to me, the question is, how do you actually then motivate and facilitate the CPA into making those introductions? Because CPAs are busy people too, and they're risk averse, right? So how do you motivate and facilitate that in a way that they take action on your behalf? And so one of the ways that I love to encourage people to do this, especially if they already have an existing CPA relationship or relationships, is to work with a CPA, but to create essentially a custom version of the book that the CPA has their own personalized forward in. So the beautiful thing about publishing today is that I can have my book on Amazon, but I can also private print multiple versions of the book that aren't there in the general marketplace. But let's say I have a COI, a CPA relationship. I approach them and say, hey, I have this book and I'd love to have you write a forward to it. And then from there, now they have ownership of it, right? It's no longer your book and your message. Now it's our book and our message, because there's a certain level of status and prestige that comes with having your name on the front cover of the book. Well, now that's a different ballgame. And so just recently I had a client who did this, and he has a relationship with a CPA. I mean, many were CPAs, but he did that. The CPA wrote the custom forward. And because of that step, the CPA then sent out a letter on their own letterhead. And we facilitated this whole thing, but it sent out to like 1,000 of their clients with a letter saying, we endorse and recommend this firm for these reasons. By the way, I'm including our book, which I wrote the forward to, for you. Immediately, guess what happened? Ring, 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 ring. People started calling because you have trust squared. You have the CPA making that endorsement, that referral, plus you have the authorship going into it. So to me, that's one of the smartest, most savvy ways to do it.
No, that makes perfect sense. Love to kind of, something we mentioned earlier, kind of from an author to authority. What role have you seen the idea of authority-based marketing play in all of this?
The other thing that I was going to mention was speaking. Authorship, being an author opens up many speaking opportunities, whether it's speaking online on podcasts like we're doing now, whether it's at events, whether it's, breakout session, keynotes, etc. Authorship opens up the opportunity for a lot more media opportunities, as well as speaking. It's my belief that authorship plus speaking is what I would define as a 1 + 1 = 3 activity. Now, I know for any advisor, they're like, that math does not make sense, but stick with me. 1 + 1 = 3, meaning that there's enormous synergy between the credibility that comes through authorship. And when you marry that to speaking, again, whether it's in person or online, that to me is one of the most influential things that you can do to not only create awareness for your message and who you are, but ultimately, done well, to attract the right people to you.
Excellent. In your book, From Author to Authority, you emphasize mastering LinkedIn. From your perspective, what are the 3 most common mistakes you see advisors making when trying to market themselves, and how can they avoid them?
So I would say that we're all salespeople. I'm a salesperson. I would imagine you're a salesperson in some capacity or multiple capacities. We're all salespeople to certain degrees. And so I don't mean sales, that is a bad word.
You're 100% accurate.
Yeah. But your average prospect does not you shouldn't come across as a salesperson is what I want to say, right? We're all in the business of selling, but we don't want to be quote unquote salesy. Nobody likes to be sold to. People like to buy. So whether it's in a LinkedIn or any marketing medium, the first thing that you need to think about doing is, how do you differentiate yourself? How do you transform yourself from being seen as that salesperson into being seen as that trusted expert? And this goes back to the question about authority marketing. So what is authority marketing? It's elevating yourself in such a way that people, you not only have their expertise, but you're seen as having the expertise. There's interesting statistics out there. I read one that 70% of the marketplace places more value on someone being an author than having a PhD, which in my mind is crazy. I would imagine a PhD, spends a lot more time, energy, and money in becoming a PhD, but the marketplace does not know how to translate into tangible value. Same thing for a lot of advisors. There's a lot of, I call it alphabet soup. There's the CFP, the CLU, the dozen other things, which are great. I mean, those are all educational things and they serve a purpose. But when you market that and say, hey, I got these, dozen different alphabet soups, the marketplace doesn't know how to interpret that. But when you say that I'm an author or I'm a best-selling author, immediately you stand out, you're differentiated. It's like I said before, it's the new college degree. It makes you stand out. People take notice. And so now people are willing to at least give you a listen, give you a try. What is it that this person's saying that's different? Again, it goes back to, you don't want to just be an author and a bad author, or a speaker and a bad speaker. You need to have a quality product, quality message that you put out there. But when you're able to do that in that way as well, I think it creates an unfair advantage, because now suddenly, instead of chasing after people as a salesperson, you're flipping the script, and now they're coming to you because they're attracted to your message.
Over the past several years, you've helped several advisors, numerous ones, enhance their businesses by becoming an author. Is there a specific success story of an advisor who implemented your methods and saw significant results that stands out?
Yeah. Absolutely. The one that stands out to me right now is his name is Mark Miller. We helped him write a book called The Tax-Free Business Owner, how business owners can legally pay zero taxes. And so, first and foremost, I just love the title of that book because that's what I would call a big idea, right? As a business owner, a successful business owner, what's our biggest expense? Taxes. And so, if I come across that, I don't need to know who Mark Miller is at that point. I just come across that message and that stands out to me, like bright neon lights. And it's like, okay, I might be skeptical at first, but I need to know a little bit more about that because this is my biggest expense and I'm in pain. And so just the way that we were able to help them articulate that one big idea, I would call it a sticky idea that really stands out in the marketplace, was the first step. Second step in his case is that we've been working with him for, I want to say 3 years or so now. And what we've specifically helped him with is then take the book and then implement it into a LinkedIn strategy to put the book out there in front of business owners and to attract them back to him. And what I love about what we've seen in his case is that LinkedIn, any type of, I would call it cold marketing, meaning that you're reaching out to someone that doesn't already know you exist, is always challenging, right? Because it goes back to, who are you? I don't want to be sold to. What do you want? Right. And so our approach for LinkedIn, which is very common for a lot of advisors, is that the best way to stand out is to lead with your book, right? People don't care about you yet per se, but they do have problems and they have, what's in it for me. And if you lead with your book, such as Mark did, and to say essentially something to the fact of, hey, I'm Mark Miller and I just wrote the book, The Tax-Free Business Owner. And if you're a business owner and you're paying X dollars in taxes, I'd love to send you a complimentary copy. Okay. If I'm a business owner, I'm in that situation, that's a pretty easy yes. And you go from suddenly, I have no idea who you are, to your book's just arrived in the mail. Wow, it's an hour read. So now I've read the book. And now I'm like mad at my CPA because he hasn't helped me save taxes. And suddenly they take the next step, which is to schedule time on Mark's calendar and talk about their situation. And we're talking about affluent business owners, people that typically already have advisors or multiple advisors. And because the message is so powerful and it stands through, what I love about it and just the whole approach, and he just exemplifies it, is that he's able to go after this, I would say, cold market. But the person that goes through this process, reads the book, schedules with him, he quote unquote closes at an 80% ratio, which is just crazy. I mean, that's what typically people do with referrals, not with cold prospects. And this is with affluent people who already have advisors. And so, that use case of conversion, of first awareness and attraction, but then secondly, conversion, is one of the best uses of the book. And it goes back into one of the ideas that we talked about earlier, which is time, right? And to me, this just flips it on its head because you start out thinking, well, I don't have time to write a book. I would say you don't have time not to write a book, because how much time are you spending on these sales calls that drag on, that go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, and then they stop returning your text or your messages? In Mark's case, he closes them within 2 calls at an 80% level, assuming that, they're qualified and they read the book as part of the process. And he saves an enormous amount of time. And he's able to attract and get in front of the ideal people that he wants to get in front of.
That's excellent. Final question. At Harbor, we're firm believers in active management, though it's important to acknowledge that every financial expert has their own unique perspective. Your perspective, Paul, is about advisors actively marketing themselves in their practice. What advice would you give to an advisor who's on the fence about becoming an author? And it can be as simple as, do it, you won't regret it.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking the Nike slogan, right? Just do it. Just do it. Because it depends. If you're on the fence, then it's just do it. If you're on the fence, it's just do it. If it's something that you haven't yet thought about and you're like, okay, this is new information to me, I haven't yet thought about that, then I'd say read my book, The Short Book Formula. But if you're on the fence, you're like, I want to become an author, I see the benefits, and what do I do? In that case, I say just do it.
Makes perfect sense. Last but not least, how can people find you?
Best way to find me is online. Go to theshortbookformula.com, theshortbookformula.com.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to go into my favorite part of the podcast, I call it the lightning round, but officially it's called 60 Seconds with Paul McManus. Let me know when you're ready.
I am ready.
Hidden talent.
I speak Japanese.
If you could instantly become an expert in anything, what would it be?
I love the field of authority marketing and influence, and I'm already an expert, but I would love just to deepen that and continue to learn that.
What's the best professional advice you've ever received?
Leadership matters more than technical ability.
What's the most memorable place you've ever traveled to?
India.
You could live in any decade, past or future. Which would it be and why?
1980s. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and for some reason, that era just seems like everything made sense.
What's one financial buzzword you wish would disappear forever?
Holistic.
What never fails to make you laugh?
I'm on X or Twitter all the time, and I get a lot of entertainment from it.
What piece of advice would you give your younger self?
Start saving more earlier.
What's one question you think all clients should ask their financial advisor?
What's your net worth?
Most rewarding part of your job?
Helping financial advisors write and share their story.
Favorite way to get active?
Walking my dog potato chips.
Whether you're a seasoned advisor or just getting started, the Active Advisor, brought to you by Harbor Capital, offers professional insights for the financial advisor community. Visit us at harborcapital.com to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe to the Active Advisor on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on investment trends, tried and tested research methods, and what your industry peers are up to. From all of us at Harbor Capital, thanks for tuning in.
And now for important disclosures. This material is for informational purposes and is not intended to be relied upon as a forecast, research, or investment advice, and is not a recommendation, offer, or solicitation to buy or sell any securities or adopt any investment strategy. The opinions expressed are as of 24th of September 2024 and are subject to change. The opinions expressed by the speakers do not necessarily represent the views of Harbor Capital Advisors, Inc. The information and opinions contained in this material are derived from proprietary and non-proprietary sources deemed by Harbor Capital Advisors, Inc. to be reliable and are not necessarily all-inclusive and are not guaranteed as to accuracy. This material may contain forward-looking information that is not purely historical in nature. Such information may include, among other things, projections and forecasts. There is no guarantee that any of these views will come to pass. This material may not be representative of the experience of other individuals. Reliance upon information in this material is at the sole discretion of the viewer. This material is not legal, tax, or accounting advice. Please consult with a qualified professional for this type of advice. Investing involves risk, including the risk of loss. Stock markets are volatile, and equity values can decline significantly in response to adverse issuer, political, regulatory, market, and economic conditions. Fixed income investments are affected by interest rate changes and the creditworthiness of issuers. As interest rates rise, the values of fixed income securities are likely to decrease. Specific companies and issuers are mentioned for educational purposes only and should not be deemed a recommendation to buy or sell any securities. Any companies mentioned do not necessarily represent current or future holdings of any investment products. Harbor Capital Advisors, Inc. does and may seek to do business with companies covered in this podcast. As a result, listeners should be aware that the firm may have a conflict of interest that could affect the objectivity of this podcast. This material is prepared by Harbor Capital Advisors, Inc. Harbor Capital Advisors, Inc. is not affiliated with More Clients, More Fun. All trademarks or product names mentioned herein are the property of their respective owners. Copyright 2023 Harbor Capital Advisors, Inc. All rights reserved.